On this episode, we're going to be talking about Jaden Rashada, NIL, and the Florida Gators. Hey, everybody, I'm Will Miles with Read and Reaction, back with another article from our website, www.readandreaction.com. Again, just a reminder, and really thank you to everybody who's already helped us out over there, but we have a preseason magazine, all Florida Gators, all the time, 156 pages specifically about Florida. So go ahead and check it out. If you go to readandreaction.com/mag, that's readandreaction.com/mag, you can pick that up for the 4th of July. It's a digital magazine, so you can download it right away, read it while you're out there at the beach, read it while you're on summer vacation. Let us know what you think. And certainly there's a little bit of recruiting in there, but for the most part, it is for the most part, it's football, a lot about Billy Napier, a lot about his staff, a lot about the things that you should expect from the players that are coming back this year. And we're really excited about it. So thank you for helping us out. Again, you can get that at www.readandreaction.com/mag. So now on to the article. Let's talk about NIL and the Gators. Jaden Rashada's recent commitment has cast a somewhat negative light on NIL and the Gators. The question then is, why does it seem like Florida can't keep up in those sorts of recruiting battles? That's a question that's been thrown my way a lot lately. Given the rumors flying around after the commitment of quarterback Jaden Rashada to Miami, those questions have intensified considerably. There's a lot of talk about violations, NCAA rules, and dollar amounts that can't possibly be true. So I think it might make some sense to talk through some of these issues and see if we can't bring some sanity to a situation that currently has precious little. Why isn't the NCAA enforcing its NIL rules? Part 1. The NCAA issued a memo to member institutions in May that third-party entities, often called collectives, that broker NIL deals, would not be allowed to promise those NIL deals in exchange for enrolling and playing at a particular school. At the time, the NCAA gave its enforcement staff permission to go after egregious violations. If the word egregious violation sounds vague, it is, and I suspect that lack of clarity is intentional. The reason is that the NCAA recently got blasted by the U.S. Supreme Court in NCAA versus Alston. The case had to do with antitrust rules as applied to college sports, and Justice Brett Kavanaugh had this to say, quote, "Nowhere else in America can businesses get away with agreeing not to pay their workers a fair market rate on the theory that their product is defined by not paying their workers at a fair market rate. And under ordinary principles of antitrust law, it is not evident why college sports should be any different. The NCAA is not above the law." The entire opinion is a useful read if you're trying to predict what might come next with college athletics. The court didn't remove the NCAA's amateurism model, but it made it clear the next time a case comes before it, or lower courts who read Kavanaugh's opinion, that they wouldn't get any special antitrust exemptions. That means that it behooves the NCAA to stay out of the court system. NIL was an attempt to do just that. By allowing players to receive compensation for their name, image, and likenesses, the hope was that players would be happy enough to keep out of the courts because there is a much bigger prize out there than booster dollars: television. The SEC generated revenue in excess of $770 million in its 2020-2021 fiscal year. That equated to $54.6 million for each school. That also was with a television contract that paid the SEC, quote, only $55 million annually, compared to the ESPN deal that is set to kick in 2024 that will pay out $300 million per year. None of that money is currently being touched by NIL. This is the thing I've heard very few people talking about, though I have been writing about it over at Gator Country for a while. There's something unseemly about asking your fans and or boosters to pay for recruits when the only reason that television exists is because of those recruits. But so long as collectives are paying these recruits, there is zero incentive for programs to get involved. To do so would put their other revenue at risk. On3 Sports reported that Rashada's NIL deal with Miami was $9.5 million. Now, there's a lot of wiggle room in those numbers for a few reasons. One, there's zero incentive for someone who negotiated the deal to actually give out real numbers. Inflate these numbers, and you hopefully inflate the next ones as well. And second, the deal highlighted by The Athletic previously this offseason had incentives to keep the player in school, which I'm sure were tiered towards the back end. In many ways, it's like the NFL, where someone signs a $100 million contract, but it's really only guaranteed $15 million. But let's take that $9.5 million as gospel. Over a 4-year period, that means Rashada cost the Miami NIL coffers $2.4 million per year. That would equate to more than 4% of the total payout to each team for a given year in the SEC. At those prices, there wouldn't be enough money to secure a full team. But the beauty of the current system is that the conferences and programs don't have to worry about that. Where does the NIL money come from? It's clear that significant money is coming in for NIL from boosters. But the question then is, how big is each team's war chest? Stat guru Bud Davis broke this down in the following tweet, plotting athletic profit against booster donations. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Texas A&M absolutely dominates his chart, followed by Georgia, while Alabama is in the middle of the pack. But Bud's bullet point about programs needing to shift booster dollars from the athletic department to NIL, and that lots of money may be tied up in athletic department-specific endowments, is a really important insight. The result is that Alabama may have all of its money tied up in places where it can't be given to a player, while A&M can divert booster giving quickly to NIL applications. That's as good a reason as any as I can think of about why Lord Saban's been squealing so much lately about Jimbo. It's the first time his arsenal is depleted compared to his opponent since he was the head coach of the Dolphins. And we all know how that ended up. Scott Strickland went all in on securing donations for facilities improvements and the like, along with significant buyouts for Jim McElwain and Dan Mullen. I suspect that many of those being approached for NIL at this point feel like they've done their part. I kind of agree with them. The problem is that the university can't kick in dollars into a collective, so they end up with the same problem, a lesser war chest than their rivals. It's basically the New York Yankees and the Oakland A's payroll out there, or perhaps the Yankees and the Red Sox, since this is still the SEC. So we come back to, why isn't the NCAA enforcing its rules, NIL rules, part 2. So this gets back to why the NCAA isn't likely to enforce its rules when it comes to inducing players to commit, given some sort of agreement on NIL dollars. The NCAA is not above the law should be ringing through every college football decision maker's ears. That statement from Justice Kavanaugh means that the NCAA is likely to lose any lawsuit where they are found to be restricting an athlete's earnings intentionally. I always assumed that the Supreme Court decision was eventually going to bring about a significant coalescence of the major powers into a league separate from what we currently call FBS. That seemed on the horizon when Texas and Oklahoma decided to commit to the SEC just prior to last season, and maybe it's even closer now that USC and UCLA are headed to the Big Ten. But as I take a closer look at the incentive structures, I'm not sure major powers are going to be incentivized to break away, not when they're not paying their own bills. Under the current NIL system, schools are going to get the exact same payouts, but they've managed to convince their boosters to get into an arms race for players. The dollar amounts are high enough that the players aren't going to risk their deals to buck the system, so the NCAA is less likely to get taken to court and open up their other revenue to the players. Coaches at various schools might complain, but their actual school administration would be foolish to do anything but complain, given that their revenues are going to go up with essentially zero change to personnel costs. So everyone in this endeavor is incentivized to maintain the status quo, other than just doing things that make TV deals bigger. Thus, the addition of the major powers to the SEC and the Big Ten. The only thing that screws it up, for the people making the big dollars at least, is a lawsuit. If the rules were enforced and a hammer was dropped on a program for acting outside of those rules in a way that tamped down the NIL market for other players, I think there's a good case to be made that the NCAA or the conference is engaging in restraint of trade. Given the precedent, that likely would be frowned upon by the courts. Perhaps more importantly, it would likely open up the other revenue sources to negotiations with the players. And since the NIL money comes from outside the school, it doesn't significantly impact the school's bottom line. Maybe that's not true if the money that's donated to a collective would have been donated to the program prior to NIL, but compared to the TV money, it's a fairly small deal. So what that means is that college football is left in a weird situation where the rules exist, but there's zero enforcement mechanism. The money is unequal because of where it comes from and through what entity is just as important as how much. And you have schools that have decided to overpay early, expecting at some point for the NCAA and or conferences to come in and essentially remove the rules separating NIL from actual paying inducement in a quote unquote clarification after they've already gained the edge in recruiting. We already saw this with the May memo from the NCAA. It was supposed to tamp this sort of thing down, but instead we've only seen it accelerate. I'm sure that some schools took it as a signal that thumbing their nose at the rules would just result in another sternly worded memo and decided to take the edge while it's there. Takeaway. What this means for Florida is they're in a tough spot if they want to work within the rules. You're not technically allowed to offer NIL benefits and as an inducement to come to a school, but it's pretty clear that's happening. However, because those rules are really unenforceable, are you really breaking the rules if you decide to participate? But the Gators are also in a tough spot considering their position in the SEC. More than any other, the SEC is the conference that benefits most by having the current NIL structure in place. They have the most tradition and the most rabid fan bases, along with a ton of booster money to be pointed towards NIL. It's also the conference that gets hurt the most should TV money have to get shared with the players. The hope in some circles was that bringing the money to the surface through NIL would eliminate the need to break the rules. We all know that college sports have been filled with black market money used for player acquisition prior to NIL. But since the NCAA says you're not allowed to use NIL to induce players to play at your school, it essentially set up another black market. I say this because if Anthony Richardson didn't play football for Florida, he wouldn't be marketable to a Gainesville, Florida audience. It's his ability to play football that makes his name and image valuable. And to ignore the connection between the two sets up the conundrum programs that want to play within the rules now find themselves. The pressure is intense to win and recruit in college football. I suspect that Florida is going to make the decision to ignore the NCAA's memo, just like other institutions have done. That doesn't make the Gators dirty. It is what is necessary given the constraints placed upon college football programs at the present time and weighing a cost-benefit analysis that really has no cost associated with it. After all, the same On3 article that referenced the $9.5 million for Rashada said that he turned down $11 million from Florida. If true, that means the Gators have already decided to play the game. They just lost this particular battle. So that's my take on NIL and the Gators. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully make some comments, right? Let me know what you think. Let me know if you think I'm way off base. I mean, obviously the USC and UCLA, I sort of started writing this before that news came out, and then that news has come. And so maybe things have accelerated towards super conferences. Again, that was something I thought was coming. And the Big Ten makes sense because you've got big markets like Rutgers out there in New York. And if you're getting the Los Angeles market, now you've got that. Colorado in Denver is a big market you might go after. You think about Oregon being a big market, especially with Phil Knight's dollars. There's going to be a lot of dominoes to fall. College football is going to change quite a bit, but it's fascinating to see how it does, and it's fascinating that the way NIL I think was intended, where someone was going to be able to sell T-shirts, with their name on it and things like that, has really morphed into something where these schools have found other sources of revenue to pay what ostensibly are their employees, and so that's throwing a wrench in everything and making it an interesting economic landscape, even if maybe it makes people uneasy about all the change that's going on in college sports. So with that, I'm going to let you go, but thanks again for supporting us over here at the website and the YouTube channel. Again, if you want to get our preseason magazine, it's at readandreaction.com/MAG. Thanks so much. And we'll be back pretty soon with another article. Go Gators.